back to the rally, everybody. Guys, let's continue to talk some Stanley Cup Finals here. Let's bring in the host, one of the hosts of What Chaos. It's a great podcast, talking all things NHL, Pete Blackburn. Pete, great to see you. Let's talk about this series, because last time we had you on, we thought it was over, but Edmonton, they continue to fight back. They've won 2 in a row. So what's your confidence level right now that the Panthers can close this thing out?
Well, I'm still pretty confident. They're a good team. They need to win half as many games as the Oilers do at this point. But, I mean, based off of the way the last 2 games have gone, you got to give credit to Edmonton. Not only did they stay alive, but they annihilated Florida in Game 4 to stay alive. And then they bounced back, and they had a really strong follow-up performance in Game 5, in which they kind of had to survive the last 30 minutes. But you like a lot of the things that you're seeing from Edmonton, chief among them, and I was listening to the last segment, Connor McDavid right now is the leader in the clubhouse in my mind. And not only the leader in the clubhouse, but like the surefire Conn Smythe of this playoff run. And he's playing at the top level. And that's just something that no team in the NHL can match, even when you have a guy like Sasha Barkov and a very good defensive team in the Florida Panthers. It's just, that guy is a generational talent who is showing it on the biggest stage in the sport right now. And it's incredible to watch. I'm so glad that this has become a series. I'm so glad it's going back to Edmonton. That is going to be an absolute scene on Friday night.
Pete, I completely agree. I don't think it's a question anymore, regardless of who wins the Stanley Cup, of who the Conn Smythe Trophy winner will be, and that's going to be Connor McDavid. 42 points in the Stanley Cup playoff this year, 5 away from tying Wayne Gretzky's all-time record in 1985. Regardless, I think, of whether or not the Oilers win this series, there won't be any questions about Connor McDavid's ability to step up in big-time games going forward. So, of course, he wants the cup for his legacy, no question about it, but there aren't going to be any questions of how this guy shows up in big games going forward.
I want to ask Pete this, because I know we talked about this earlier about, should you be able to get the MVP award if you're on the losing team? Pete, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Connor McDavid is inarguably the best player of the playoffs so far, and that doesn't change whether or not the Oilers win or whether the Panthers win. He's putting together a record-breaking playoff run. It's something to marvel at, and to trick ourselves and to do brain gymnastics into thinking that he can't be the MVP of the playoffs just because his team didn't win. Like, we can't hold hockey up as the best team sport in all of the major sports, while also saying, well, this one guy who had a record-breaking and unbelievable playoff run wasn't the MVP of the playoffs because his team didn't win. Those two things just don't mesh, and we don't have to trick ourselves into believing otherwise. I struggle a little bit, and we talked about this earlier, like MVP, like how valuable can you be if your team doesn't win? Right, like, and this is a thing that we do in all sports, like NFL, the MVP seems like it's just going to go to a quarterback. We just change it to most outstanding. Like, let's just do that and call it a day. But this idea that you're on the losing team, but you are more valuable than anybody else, like, I kind of get there, but I think the value's diminished when you didn't win.
My thing is we've had the GOAT conversation around him, and that people were saying, well, you can't consider him the GOAT unless he wins a Stanley Cup, right? Well, okay, what if he wins an MVP if he's not even on the winning team? How does that impact the GOAT conversation with him?
I think, and Pete, I'll throw it to you in just a sec. I still think that the question would remain for Connor McDavid to win the Stanley Cup. However, I certainly think that it would be another line to add to his already sterling resume. But I still think, regardless of winning the Conn Smythe, you got to hoist the real trophy, the one that everybody actually wants, in order to be considered a GOAT.
Yeah, there's a separating line between the most talented offensive player of all time and the greatest player of all time. And I think where greatest kind of comes into a more complete package is that you have to have the titles that go along with it, regardless of whether or not it's an individual thing or a team sport or whatever. Like, you need the titles in order to complete the what's around talent. And that's why I think Tom Brady is the greatest quarterback of all time, even though he may not be the most talented. It's because he led his team several times over to the title. And so I think Connor McDavid needs that. But I will say, if he wins the Conn Smythe, it does take a little bit of ammunition out of the haters' belt in saying that, well, he doesn't show up when the lights are the brightest. And that's often a criticism against McDavid. And it's been a criticism against great players in the past. Like Alexander Ovechkin was for a long time criticized, well, he can't get it done in the playoffs, despite being basically a point-per-game player in all of his previous playoff runs. So you take that ammunition and that clip out of the belt if you win a Conn Smythe, even being on the losing side.
All right, well, let's talk about the Panthers here because they're looking to bounce back. They have given up a shorthanded goal in the last 2 games, 5 total this offseason. Pete, is that a fluke?
No, I mean, I think their power play has been very bad this postseason, if we're being honest, and they're going up against a penalty kill that has been unbelievable for Edmonton. I don't necessarily think that it's a fluke. I think that it shows where the Panthers really need to work on their power play and where Edmonton has found a strength in their PK. And you got to give credit to Connor Brown, specifically on Edmonton's side, because 2 straight games he's opened up the scoring with a shorthanded goal. And that's a guy who took 55 games to get his first goal of the season during the regular season. And when you look at when he finally did score his first goal in Edmonton, it was basically like they had won the Stanley Cup. That's how hard they exploded in that building for Connor Brown and how hard he had to fight for that first one. So it's been pretty incredible to see him turn around and find his redemption arc in the biggest spot in the playoffs.
Yeah, the other Connor, Pete has come up really big throughout the playoffs for Edmonton. And I remember, I think it was in the series against the Vancouver Canucks, they gave him the team award of the plunger in the locker room after the game. Just the gritty guy who does the unheralded stuff, the stuff that no one really sees from 30,000 feet above the game, but clearly a huge linchpin in the Edmonton Oilers' success this postseason. And I was asked earlier in the Stanley Cup playoffs about Edmonton's special teams performance, and I kind of thought it was a fluke earlier in the playoffs because their penalty kill specifically was NHL average during the regular season, but over a 92% penalty kill success rate in the playoffs, more shorthanded goals scored than power play goals allowed. I give that unit a lot of credit for being truly elite in the playoffs when it's mattered most. I don't think it's a fluke anymore for Edmonton's penalty kill at this point.